How many hours a week do they think they're wasting due to poor technology? And the consensus in the UK was around 4 hours a week. And there's around 20,000 surgeons in the UK, which is approximately 4 million hours every year. Being able to provide solutions that can start eroding hundreds of years every year of wasted time should actually enable our physicians, our surgeons, our healthcare professionals to spend more time with patients and less time clicking around on antiquated systems. The opportunity with software and technology and some of this digital overhaul is staring us in the face. But I think from an engineering perspective, from a product development perspective, there are many philosophical questions we have to ask. Are we building these things in the right way? Are we building them in the right order? And I think some companies and some initiatives have actually missed out, and detrimentally so, on considering variously the ethical and other considerations of what it means to build out digital, particularly in healthcare.
All right, this week I'm joined by George Murgatroyd, VP of Digital Technologies, a leading medtech unit within Medtronic. George has over 20 years of experience working with the NHS, currently working to define Medtronic's digital ecosystem. And Medtronic believes technology is key to transforming a healthcare system in crisis, revitalising patient care and creating an operating room fit for the future. All sounds very cool. George, welcome to the Healthtech Podcast. How are you doing, sir?
James, I'm doing very well. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to the next hour or so.
Awesome. Yeah, me too, man. You've got a really interesting background. Obviously, starting in the good old NHS, like the best of us, and rising to the dizzy heights that you are now. So yeah, really, really interested actually in the journey, and I guess everything you've done along that. I was looking on your LinkedIn, and you know, you view the first 3 things, then it's like see another 15. I was like, oh god, okay, right. There's quite a lot probably to go through in this journey, so like we'll see. But before we get into it, whereabouts are you speaking to us from? Whereabouts are you based?
I am based in the little market town of Hitchin, which is just north of Stevenage. It's around 40 miles north of the capital city of the UK, London.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Well, yeah, let's get into it. What does it take to go from the NHS to, you know, digital technologies and Medtronic? There's probably quite a few people listening that are quite fancy that job title. So, yeah, tell us the journey.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's been a fun journey, and one with various kind of pivots and turns. I was brought up in the north of England, in a little seaside town called Morecambe. We were talking before this podcast, James, just in terms of where you hail from, Wolverhampton. I think share, I'm sure, some of the benefits and challenges of growing up in lesser known towns within the UK.
The biggest challenge is being a Wolves fan, George. Like sitting at the bottom of the table currently, and just that's the biggest challenge, I would say.
Oh, well, I'd trade you Morecambe FC if you want the shrimps.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So yeah, I grew up in just outside Morecambe in a medical family. So both my parents were doctors from a long lineage of doctors, physicians, and I decided fairly early on that I didn't want to go into medicine. I think partly informed by the 80s and 90s experience of my mum and dad being phoned at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. On the home telephone, and then the bleeper and all of that. So I actually first wanted to be a rock drummer, which is what I did for a little while. Played the drums in various bands, and did make a visit once to Wolverhampton on a little tour.
Civic Hall.
Also played in Preston, Blackpool, all the sites.
All the big names, yeah.
All the big names. And drumming didn't work out, and then I decided I wanted to be a philosopher. So I went to university and studied philosophy for many, many years. And I'm surrounded actually in my home by lots of philosophical texts and books.
Do you have a favourite philosopher?
Well, Plato. Look, there's a Plato book. Kant, I think, probably.
Okay.
Immanuel Kant. So I did a degree and then a PhD, but it transpired there wasn't a great deal of promising career progression in philosophy. And whilst I was doing my study, I was also working in the NHS in primary care in IT. And from there on in, carved out a bit of a career in healthcare technology, in information systems, in data, ultimately through to where I am today. Worked at various places like the General Medical Council, which sometimes when I'm talking to doctors makes them shiver a little bit. You showed no perceptible signs of unease.
My heart rate's gone up. Yeah.
Yes. It's an interesting place. I wasn't there for very long, around a year, at the period of revalidation. Ventured off to do some education tech for a little while, and then landed back working with the NHS on data, software, and was in the throes of working alongside the NHS in a lot of the data IT developments when I got a call from a little startup called Touch Surgery that was focused on building Jean and Andre, two surgeons from the UK who stepped out of surgery and set up a company that was looking at redefining the education of surgery using digital, mobile, and various neat technologies. So I entered the startup world for a little while, and then came into Medtronic, where I am today. So I've been on a journey over the past almost 2 decades, working in the NHS in various small and quite large companies, global companies, really trying to solve some fundamental challenges in, I think, hopefully really good ways for primarily physicians, surgeons, nurses, and their teams. And I'm looking forward to having a chat with you, James, about some of the opportunity there and some of the challenge, which is why, alas, my hair is grayed through the information technology vortex that I have been on within healthcare. That's a little bit about me.
Nice.
And the journey. I would say, it's, as I said at the start, some pivots, some turns, not always been laser focused on what I wanted to do. I have worked with colleagues who've written down where they want to get to under their pillow and slept on it and got there. But I actually, leaving academia, tried to cram in purposefully as many jobs and as many experiences as I could, which I think has really helped.
Yeah. So you've been across academia, startups, corporates. You've sort of seen it all, haven't you? What's been the learning point for you, I guess, going through that journey? Is corporate where you're most comfortable? What was your touch surgery experience like, and the difference between the two there, and how wildly different are those two things from academia? Like, how's your experience been of those three worlds?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think, big corporations, big companies are made up of cultures and subcultures and teams. So there isn't really one, generic culture across companies. Medtronic has around 100,000 employees spread globally in almost every country in the world. Our technology impacts 2 patients a second, which gives you a sense of the scale of the scale of the company. But 75 years ago, Medtronic was founded in a garage by 2 engineers who were trying to figure out how to make the first battery-powered pacemaker. So all big companies generally start as small startups, often out of garages, and grow from there. And I think you often still retain the innovation, the engineering focus, the pioneering spirit, because you're building on the shoulders of innovators, of entrepreneurs all over the place. The startup mentality is amazing. And I think, we're really lucky in the UK, particularly in health, to have so many great healthcare startups. I think all over the place, not just in London, across Manchester, Northern Ireland, Scotland, some really great companies. And they really are powered by the people doing extraordinary things, cramming so much into a 7-day week. And you certainly learn at a startup tenacity, can-do attitudes, the ability to work and gel together as a team. And if I can bring any of that kind of mentality with me in my day-to-day work, I think I'm the better for it.
Yeah. So what were you doing at Touch Surgery? What was your job there?
So I, on paper, was the vice president of product, data science, and marketing. I think that was probably about it. So I got to work very closely with the two co-founders on, I guess, the phase 2 or 3 of their product journey, at the point where there was a transition from what had been a consumer app, so a surgeon, physician, nursing focused app on surgery that was free. I joined at the point there was a positioning to start developing technologies for hospitals and technologies to go into the operating room. So a real focus on real world surgical data, on the interpretation of things like surgical video, which was a diversification and a real growth of the company. So that was really exciting, doing something that very few organizations worldwide were trying to do, working with physicians, with surgeons, with an amazing engineering team. And I have told this anecdote before, but prior to joining Touch, I was working with for a data science software company. I think I'd come directly from meeting the then NHS chair. So I was wearing a suit and a tie, and walked into the Old Street office of Touch to be greeted by the then CTO wearing a vest and shorts and flip-flops. And progressively got more and more informal the more people I kind of met along the way. And as that happened, my kind of tie came off, my shirt, my suit jacket came off, which is, I think, I know it's an anecdote and maybe a fairly harmless one, but I think sums up in some of the innovation the fact that there is a focus on the output. There's a focus on the innovation. There isn't really that much focus given on what you wear, how you turn up. It really is a focus on the deliverables. So yeah, that was a fun journey, and get to work with a lot of the same individuals today. Actually,
that's awesome. In your career, so you talked about going to a data science company there and Touch Surgery, and obviously now Medtronic, and previously being in the NHS in primary care. You've worked at the GMC. Just looking through his LinkedIn now, like there's loads of stuff in bits and bobs. Obviously, you've done philosophy and you've read philosophy, so on some level you must be a philosophical man. And so, I guess, what are you looking for in those roles and those jobs and those moves? Like, I guess on a really practical level, you must be looking for certain things, but I guess is purpose important to you? And how do you think about you must take a view on like the philosophy of the company or the culture of the company or the founders or the people that you work with or that kind of thing. Like, do you think about your career in that way, or do you just go super practical and you're like, I just want to learn this skill and go to the next place? Or how do you think about it?
I mean, I think at a certain, level, almost all roles, particularly team-based roles and roles that are solving problems, are highly philosophical. I'm sure you find that in medicine, across.
Plagued me in medicine.
Yeah,
plagued me.
There's obviously science. But there's also, very existential things that you have to deal with. And I'm sure, James, you've dealt with many of those during your kind of time in medicine. But I think from an engineering perspective, from a product development perspective, there are many philosophical questions we have to ask. Are we building these things in the right way? Are we building them in the right order? Some of the aspects we have to approach are really quite profound when we think about data, access to data, who has the right to do what with data. Now we're obviously knee deep in AI, or maybe we're over our heads and we just don't realize it. These are tremendously philosophical aspects, and I think some companies and some initiatives have actually missed out, and detrimentally so, on considering variously the ethical and other considerations of what it means to build out digital, particularly in healthcare, in a regulated environment. What does it mean to add AI-powered intelligence to physicians whilst they work? And I am sure there are many of those who listen to this podcast who recognise maybe some initiatives that have occurred have not considered that, and they've just gone straight in bull in a china shop approach. So I think some of the stoicism I learned from philosophy, some of the pragmatism, the way to debate about aspects, I think has held me in good stead. But what about you? Like in your career so far, do you think the philosophical aspects?
It's a great question. Yes is the answer again. Marcus Aurelius and all that sort of stuff. Definitely read well enough to know the behaviours and the actions that will make me happier and lack the strength to do so quite often, etc. So I know enough to sort of plague myself there, but I guess that's more on a day-to-day level. In terms of medicine and health tech stuff, a couple of things that you said there. Firstly, the philosophy of intensive care really I struggled with hugely because there's a broad Western philosophy that alive longer is better. And broadly, end of story, apart from real extremes. 3 organs failing, okay, probably not. Anything below that, we're going to consider it. Because actually we feel more comfortable alive longer. And that's kind of where we've got to as a culture, that we won't question ourselves. If we made someone stay alive longer, we can always fall back on that, on our own kind of morality. Intensive care is a strange place to be exploring that, because I'm pretty clear on alive longer isn't better in quite a lot of circumstances that you see there, because you're seeing the extremes there. But what's interesting to me is that there is still an overall philosophy that alive longer is better apart from the extremes. And I found that really interesting, that okay, there is more of a conversation. I will accept. Okay, there is more of a conversation. It isn't quite the extremes, because we do talk about, when we try and quantify it in terms of organs failing and this, that, and the other. But it was interesting to me that as an anaesthetist, you manipulate consciousness for a living. I don't want to bore the listeners. I've said this a lot. Like, you manipulate consciousness for a living as an anaesthetist. Therefore, if someone loses their consciousness, could you now not act on the balance of probability as to whether they would emerge with a life that they would want? Is that not a question we could ask? 51% chance they're not going to have a life that they would want. Okay, well, could we call consciousness a blank canvas in which we could act with morality and say, it brings up euthanasia and those types of conversations that we're happy doing for animals and this and that. So it's a really interesting place to be interested in philosophy, which I was. And it was a really interesting place to read what different faiths think about consciousness, and therefore what you should be communicating to certain patients about the way that they experienced anesthetic and intensive care and things like that. That was fascinating. I don't emerge with any answers other than part of I'm not very public with this, actually, the amount I've said it But one of the key reasons I actually left medicine was my fight with the thought that my grandkids would look back at what I did on intensive care with disdain. I actually really thought about that a lot, that I thought consciousness shifts over time.
Yeah.
The perception of what's right and wrong shifts over time. And I have that flagged as a place where things happen that I'm not particularly comfortable with. Now, N=1 in this study, I'm not right. But also, I'm just a bit further from where the consensus is there than is comfortable for me to work there. And I'm not saying I'm right. I want to make that really clear as well. I'm absolutely not saying I'm right. I just have a feeling that I would have been so uncomfortable there. And the thing is, that place works. It works for what it does. It's just that it didn't work for me and what I thought was right or wrong. And there were a couple of individual cases where it showed me that, hey, look, I need to step out here, because actually harm to self, harm to others, all these things are, at risk now. And so I really struggled with that, but it's a really interesting place to explore the philosophy of certainly consciousness. You manipulate it for a living as an anaesthetist. Not that it's ever described that way, but it is what you do. The other thing that you talked about, though, is the philosophy of AI, and this is something that I've been talking about a lot recently as well. That we're trialing AI in all different parts of healthcare, broadly without thought of the extrapolation of where does this lead us, and by us I mean a community and an ecosystem. And part of a hill I was dying on was that AI and talking therapies, we need to be extremely careful what we end up being comfortable with. If we deploy AI at the point of human suffering alone, and it ends up being economically a very good idea, that is a baseline that I fear we will not recover from. I think we end up with a new baseline of what we as human beings allow in the suffering of other human beings. If we say just an AI is enough if you are suffering, because that allows us to do X, Y, and Z, and you can talk about the extra scale, the more people being treated, and you can talk about good and social good and healthcare good and all things that can lead there, which I'm happy to hear those arguments. But I do want to propose the argument that whatever we do is a new baseline, and you have to appreciate that that will be done at scale. Phoning people up after operations and an AI talks to you about, are you bleeding? Are you in pain? Are you this? Are you that? Absolutely fine for 99% of people who don't have any complications, but the 1% who had a cataract surgery that are now partially blind or have been struggling with that anxiety until this phone call is now met with an AI. What's the individual experience? What's the value placed on that? Now, again, you can argue, well, without the AI doing it, they wouldn't get a phone call at all. And so many people wouldn't get a phone call, and even though they were suffering, I just think it's a deeper conversation than what we're having, because we're not extrapolating these things. We're not thinking like, what are we aiming for? I don't think we've got the view of healthcare as a health tech community. I don't think we've got the view of this is what perfect healthcare is to us, or this is what optimal healthcare is to us. Optimal healthcare is human to human empathy at the point of human suffering. And we just say that is what we want. Because AI, fantastic at synthetic cognitive empathy. It's very good at synthetic cognitive empathy. It's not good at emotional empathy, and it lacks motivational empathy because it doesn't have motivation. So 2/3 of empathy it doesn't have, but 1/3 of it, it's really good at saying, that sucks. I bet that's really painful for you. AI is very good at that. But as a human, it doesn't mean it because it lacks a motivation and emotions. Therefore, it's not of as much value. So I worry that we're not being intentional enough about what our view is. And people might confuse this for me being an AI cynic. I'm not. I'm only saying this because I'm so bullish on AI and so optimistic that I only want it deployed where it's going to have the most benefits for the longest term without any reversal, because that's where we build the most trust in the results, and that's how we get to a better healthcare ecosystem as a whole. So that's why nobody asks me questions on this podcast, because I'll go off on one for 20 minutes.
We got deep, which is good, and I think that is why the admixture of scientists, of physicians, of individuals who really think about the connotations and consequences is part of a really good, diverse team. And it's part of the reason why I do bring up kind of philosophy background, because actually having that at the center of some of the implications of development are really important. That said, some of the things we're dealing with in the NHS are to some extent so far before some of that existential crisis. I don't think we're still using fax machines, but I wouldn't be surprised if we still are. I was speaking to some colleagues who worked in pharmacy, definitively still are using fax machines. People still saving scans, videos on DVDs. We've got I had a relative who had a major operation, who was posted a guide for how to prepare for the operation through the mail, and half of it hadn't photocopied, so they only got half of the guide. I think to some extent, therefore, there are some really very basic things that we can solve through automation and the application of technology, whilst respecting the fact that, as you say, healthcare is delivered by people. That human empathy is absolutely critical, and it's actually why in the surgical division in Medtronic, our tagline is people-powered, technology-driven. Like the people are really at the center of healthcare, both the patient and the physicians, the nursing teams, the porters, etc. And we very much see our role as providing technology to aid that, to support that and augment it. And certainly from a perspective of developing technologies that can just save healthcare professionals time, that can start taking on some of those tasks that enable physicians and healthcare professionals to get on with their jobs. That's to some extent where the aim is. I think there was a chief AI officer of one of the major US hospitals who did an interview a few weeks ago, who said exactly this, that their focus on AI is efficiency and streamlining. The text-to-speech note-taking technologies, where they're saving people recording into tape recorders or writing things down. That layer is absolutely in need of overhaul, because, as an example, we ran a survey, 300 surgeons in the UK last year, and then replicated it with 1,000 surgeons in the US. Most of the focus today of a lot of our technology is surgeons. So I will talk a bit about surgery through the remainder of the podcast. But we asked them a question, which was how many hours a week do they think they're wasting due to poor technology? And the consensus in the UK was around 4 hours a week, and the consensus in the US was around 4 hours a week, which is, if on a 48-hour year, that's 192 hours wasted a week. And there's around 20,000 surgeons in the UK, which is approximately 4 million hours every year, which is 438 years every year of wasted time if you extrapolate it. Being able to provide solutions that can start eroding hundreds of years every year of wasted time should actually enable our physicians, our surgeons, our healthcare professionals to spend more time with patients and less time clicking around on antiquated systems, spending time shouting at their computers. And so I think, as a step one, the opportunity with software and technology and some of this digital overhaul is staring us in the face. And we have to solve it if we're going to enable ourselves to kind of keep progressing on this AI journey to more and more intelligence.
I want to ask you about the role digital technologies and the digital technologies business unit at Medtronic. So a lot of what you're saying there, we can sort of put this into context with sort of what your role actually is. What digital technologies do you work with? Are you working on? Are you building? Are you partnering? Are you looking? Are you investing? Are you acquiring? How do you interact with startups? How do you interact with the health tech ecosystem at large? Where do you fit? What is the role of, even actually, what is the role of the digital technologies business unit within Medtronic as well? And what's its role there? So I guess orientate us into digital technologies in the business unit.
Well, that's a big question, James, but I'll give it a go. So Medtronic, 75 years old this year in 2024. As I say, has developed some absolutely pioneering technologies, from pacemakers to diabetes pumps, implantables, wearables, disposables, some absolutely staggering technology that's utilized in procedure rooms and hospitals worldwide. I would say industry leading, market leading. We are putting more and more finesse technology into physicians' hands. And yet, in places like surgery, variation still persists and unwarranted variation still persists. There are still errors that are made. There are still patients who don't receive the same quality of care that they may expect. And some of the efficiency that I've mentioned continues to pervade. Huge inefficiencies across workflows, across hospital workflows and healthcare workflows. And for Medtronic, we really see an opportunity to start solving some of those problems in terms of the quality of care. So improving the quality of procedures, improving ultimately patient outcomes, reducing unwarranted variation, and improving efficiency by layering in digital technologies, software, automation into our portfolio. Because you can put a stapler in anyone's hands worldwide, and obviously how they use it is going to be dependent on their skill level, and every single physician and surgeon is operating at the best. But we believe there are technologies that we can start bringing in that support surgeons, support physicians during the case, after the case, and before the case, to disseminate knowledge, to drive understanding, to improve learning, improve review, and ultimately, with some of the technology we're now bringing to the market within Medtronic, support physicians whilst they perform procedures. So an example of that, we have our GI Genius product, which is used in endoscopy and in colonoscopies, that runs during colonoscopies and detects polyps for physicians whilst they perform a colonoscopy.
Interesting.
Now it's providing an augmentation, so it's providing visual cues on where there may or may not be polyps. But some of the publication now and research, and there was a major publication, I think, in the Lancet recently on the application of this technology, has just demonstrated the way it really can support colonoscopists to perform the most optimal procedures. And we see the opportunity within Medtronic to provide technologies like that to support our physicians, to support their teams, be able to perform at the top of their game ultimately. As you'll know, as a physician, you get tired. Often the environments around you are very complex. You have high turnovers of staff. And if there are things that we can do to make physicians' workflows easier, to give them solutions that support the patient care, that are software based, and then that's where we're looking for innovation. And we've solved, I think, some of the real fundamentals now So I mentioned things like DVDs in operating rooms. I think it's absolutely astonishing in 2024 that if a surgical team perform an operation and they want to review it, they've got to burn it onto DVD and go and find a laptop or computer to watch it. That just should not happen. It shouldn't happen in any healthcare system worldwide. It certainly shouldn't happen in healthcare systems like the NHS. So providing solutions that, for example, give the full case back to the surgeon or the surgical team within seconds, that they can review without any faff, with zero effort, the ability for them to stream out an operation to their colleagues or professionals, so that they don't have to have their surgical colleagues get in a car and drive down an operating room if they want advice. Proctoring, those types of technologies we see in every other sector. We just accept as standard. I would be amazed if you still go to a Blockbuster store to try and get your videos. We aren't, unfortunately, amazed that some of our highest paid, most impactful professionals in healthcare still have to go through 1990s type steps to just get the most basic view of an operation, for example, they just performed. We take a lens, I think, within digital technologies of looking at the workflow, the surgical workflow, the patient workflow, and assessing where we think we can have an impact, by either building, partnering, and potentially acquiring technologies that will support patients and healthcare professionals across that. And as I say, it's very much a peri-procedural approach, by which I mean, where are there digital technologies that can support before procedures? And there's examples like that of automated scheduling, being able to manipulate scans in things like 3D as opposed to just black and white. During the case, how can we bring smarts, important information support to physicians and their teams whilst they operate? After the fact, where can we provide seamless automation of things like review? So it's a very broad lens, but a very specific focus on where we place our bets, where we invest, based on where we think we can have the biggest impact across healthcare systems.
It's really interesting because what you're talking about is, as you say, very broad. There's lots of different applications that you're talking about. You can look at the workflow, you can assess what's going to make impact, pre, peri, post procedures. So I guess you're connected to potentially so much there in every hospital that you're selling something or have something. You've got connections in there. You've then got this huge swell of technologies that could well be applied that you and I both know will make those clinical areas run better, those clinical workflows run better. I guess my question is, having sat on both sides of the table here, you've been on that NHS side, you've been on industry side as well. Why isn't this stuff just everywhere? Is this a challenge with assessing ROI, proving ROI? Is it capital on that side? We've spoken to a few people on this podcast about even the way that the NHS considers software technology as this kind of one-off spend rather than not. It's a capital investment rather than anything else is a problem as well. And I guess there's so many problems that can be solved. There's so many technologies that are available, yet everyone is still struggling, where if you had definite ROI, then it would make sense. So I'm just interested in your view of I think it's quite unique in everything that you've done and what you experience, I guess.
It's multifaceted, and every 200 trusts in the NHS, every trust has areas where they're excelling in and areas where they're challenged. I think, you mentioned ROI, and I think that is an area that's sometimes difficult, not least because if you have a healthcare system that has abided antiquated technology that doesn't work for a long time, people just end up getting by.
Yeah, the
and you can
workarounds.
just get by. I'll read you this quote from Martin Farrier, who's a consultant pediatrician. He did a article the other day, and he talked about how he gets to work and his clinical computer takes ages to load. And he says, it's not running slowly, it's just the way the system works. Most of the clinical systems demand clicking of irrelevant buttons to collect unseen data. There is something demoralizing about pointless clicks. It detracts from the sense of purpose. And then he says this, they leave me feeling like I'm dying inside, slowly wasting my life. How do you define an ROI of a computer that takes 5 minutes to load every morning, that leaves a physician, writing publicly that they feel like they're dying inside? We don't really have mechanisms in healthcare systems to put a dollar amount on that. And to some extent, there is a sort of, well, we'll get by. It's 5 minutes a morning, there we go. As that compounds, though, across healthcare systems, across staff, and I mentioned a survey we've done recently, I think there is very clearly, not just from some of our research, but publications now, a clear link between burnout, dissatisfaction, and potentially, unfortunately, wanting to leave the profession due to the systems and technologies that healthcare professionals have to use. I think we have to recognize that as real and really factor in that, getting software systems that just load up, eradicating things like DVDs, people being able to message each other in technology that just works, are standards that we should just have. And I think we're some way off within the NHS and other systems, because, as I say, we people do just get by. That said, when technology is implemented that just works, that's designed for healthcare professionals, the happiness and the smiles that you see and some of the messages I get from our customers, just in terms of how much it makes a difference having things that work within one click, are really something. And we shouldn't underestimate the demoralizing impact of just some of this basic technology. And not every piece of technology that we put in will save a patient's life, but I would argue a happy physician who gets to experience technology in their procedure room or their office at a hospital that works just as their technology at home works. When they talk to their smart device or they turn on their TV, things just happen within seconds. That's the type of physician we want. We don't want them caring, fretting, annoyed at things at their fingertip. We want them to just not even realize that it's a thing. That was a long answer, but I think there is a endemic challenge on the ROI piece that we do need to find strategies to overcome.
Well, let me tell you a few places that I agree with you here, because I think this is a very, very, very important point for the sector. Demoralization of workforce doesn't show up directly on a P&L, unfortunately. It doesn't show up as a cost in cash in hand terms. So it's a derived figure, and it's an assumed figure. And actually, most of the time, it's an ignored figure, because actually it's disguised in loads of other costs. The never event that happened and the subsequent litigation and legal fees, loads, right? And that's just one thing of never events and all legal. This will show up in a number of places, things that get missed, things that don't get done, basically go down all the DATEX forms and incident reports, and you can, most of them are communication issues. Communication requires energy, all of this stuff can be linked. And you mentioned that we shouldn't diminish that. I actually would raise you there that it's not even about not diminishing it. I think it's actually the role of, well, you guys have sort of put your money where your mouth is here and commissioned a study and all these things. I think this is important. And people can say it's just a study and blah, blah, blah. However, you do a study, this in a perfect world, right? You do a study like this and it shows the link between demoralization, burnout, and then never events, let's say, right? And we plot a link between those things. Never events costs the morbidity and mortality associated with those never events. Let's not ignore that. And then the economic stuff as well. So you do a study and let's say you link all of these things. It gets picked up by the media influence the public influence sentiment influence policy changes. All of a sudden there's now a financial incentive to look after your workforce. Brilliant. Like, that's great. And actually, in a world where you can't directly measure the demoralization, perhaps there should be a financial penalty when you do your staff survey every year and most of your staff are having a terrible time of it. Perhaps there should be a financial penalty if you're not going to ignore the fact, or if you are going to ignore the fact that already you are being penalized financially, you just can't see it quite yet. And I have sympathy as well, actually, because with enough fires to fight, and not enough staff and not enough money to go around and just double your staff workload, all the rest of it, of course you're going to try and do your best. And, it's not fair on those people either. It's just that I struggle to see the business models for increasing the quality of the workplace for staff. I struggle to see where that business model comes from. I don't know how, and people ask me all the time, by the way, because the most common ideas amongst clinicians looking to start their own companies are all around making the workplace better, because they know instinctively that if you make conditions better for me, I will perform better, and so will everyone that I know. They know this instinctively. And so I actually think it's a really great thing, by the way. I'm not just saying that because you're Medtronic. I'm not just saying that because you're on the podcast. Like, I work in media too. I think these things are important. And if it's you that does this study and makes that link, and then the next person picks it up, and then more and more people start to get influenced, and that's how you start to change things. And I've done a few things recently, like looking at policy and how you actually influence policy and lobbying, and all these things are linked. Like, everything is linked. And so anything that you guys are going to spend resource on to peddle this narrative is a very good thing. Like, I honestly think this stuff is really important. I also think there's another interesting one. I'll be interested in your ideas on this as well. Like, one thing that I almost wonder as well is that in medicine, a lot of and I talk about doctors here specifically, because it does apply to them, is that the way doctors now have pretty much like no choice in like where they go, particularly at the most junior level. And therefore, because they don't own that decision of where to go, again, there's no incentive on the hospital to make the conditions better for them because they lack choice. It's not as if the hospital's going to miss out on talent. They're going to treat people terribly and get the same quality of talent as everyone else. And so actually, because like that just creates this like false economy of well, I don't need to make my workplace conditions better for my staff because I get the same quality of staff anyway, which I think is also ludicrous. Like, that's not fair either, and I think is a route to some change as well. But anyway, those are my ramblings on the topic. But I long story short, I think the survey is important. I'd then go so far as to say media is then important, then changing sentiment and influencing policy and lobbying is important, and then actually getting the thing done.
Yeah.
Then putting the incentive in.
I think that's right. And sometimes get asked in terms of the development of digital and software within Medtronic, obviously, a long-standing company, and not always historically synonymous with software, automation and digital technologies. But Medtronic has been developing technologies that they've been putting in physicians' hands, that physicians put inside of patients for so long, that our focus on design, of understanding clinicians, the types of things that they use, that kind of development of devices for clinical staff, is so rooted in this company's history and how it makes decisions. And I think that's really, really critical. And from a fundamental perspective of how we're approaching digital technology, because it's the same. We know we have to develop things for physicians that are in their hands, and they may be apps rather than staplers, but they've still got to be designed for the physician, for the healthcare professional, for the nurses. And I do think, the NHS has been through so many iterations of IT and implementations of IT. I think the first one was 1992, which was called something like Information Technology for Better Health or something. There's often been thought on the technical features as opposed to the usability. And if you can get something that works on the P&L and something that is absolutely a joy to use or seamless to use, then obviously you're winning. And I think for startups, other companies that are developing technology, that's clearly a focus. But you have something that works the P&L that's dreadful to use, then I think companies need to hold themselves really accountable for that. It's why we hire, our head of design is previously from Sony Games. We hire people from consumer backgrounds, films and various other backgrounds, because we're not just trying to meet a particular KPI. We're also absolutely cognizant that the products, digital technologies, and the rest of our technologies have to be used by people every day, every hour of every day, and they need to be good. And that is not always the approach. I think, to be fair, to some information technology companies, digital technology companies that have interacted with healthcare. And to your point, it's part of the reason why there's so many startups focused on this. And it's so exciting that we now have, I think, that blend of consumer experience and medical experience starting to seed in products, in digital products, because they're the ones that are going to get traction. Right, the next EMRs after this current generation, you would bet, are going to be so good to use. They're going to be intuitive. They're not going to require, per that quote, pointless clicks. And I know we've meandered around some, existential areas and some areas of challenge, but I think there is tremendous hope. I'm optimistic for the future. I get to work with an amazing team building some great products which are now adopted globally in procedure rooms, and get to work with, observe, interact with innovators, entrepreneurs who I think of the same mindset. We can solve quality. We can build software that drives improved patient outcomes, but it can also be really great to work with. Like, those two things are not mutually exclusive now. In fact, they have to be combined if we're going to succeed and start combating some of the voices that we've heard from the healthcare professional community that are just fed up. They're fed up. They're dissatisfied. And I think within Medtronic, we certainly welcome that challenge of doing something about it.
You've obviously talked about usability quite a lot, and actually clearly like a focus of yours, and the reason that the company's gone on to do so well since it was a couple of guys in a garage or whatever. But you mentioned that the next generation of EMRs and that kind of thing. Is this, do you think, now a bit of a turning point of the expectations of users of your technology, given what's going on everywhere else in their life with how easy they can do everything else? Is it like an expectation thing that there's like this tension almost between the quality of medical devices and software as a medical device needing to catch up with everything else? And I guess the more that tension builds, the more market opportunity there is, and therefore I suppose the more innovation that's then likely to happen to come and disrupt. Therefore it is incumbent on the incumbents to disrupt themselves before they get disrupted, I guess. Is that sort of what you're talking about, the sort of rise in expectation?
Yes, and I think that's absolutely to be welcomed. I think junior medical students, born since the year 2000, right?
That's true.
2002, 2003, 2004. I think entering university, they'd be born in what, 2005 or 6?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
But that is brilliant, because there is a workforce that is savvy, that has expectations, and I think, if you walk into a procedure room and it resembles, the early 1990s, and you've got the big chunky PCs potentially running Windows XP, with someone who's born in 2003, that cannot sustain for much longer. I think healthcare tech is likely always going to be a little bit behind a consumer, particularly when we have software as a medical device or AI as a medical device, because the regulation is so important.
Absolutely.
There's understandably processes, steps that companies have to go through to demonstrate that their products are effective and will not cause patient harm, or will meet the claims that they wish to make. So that there will always, I think, be a bit of a gap, but it should not be a 2-decade gap. Right? If we can get 2, 3, or 4 years, that would be brilliant. At the moment, I think, Aradazi in his report said the NHS is at the foothills of digital, and some NHS organisations have even yet to start their digital journey. The good thing is, often there are leapfrog moments. You look worldwide at potentially countries that didn't have certain types of infrastructure, didn't have certain early iterations of the internet, and they just leapfrogged other countries now. And I think there is an opportunity for that to happen. I hope we don't, for hospitals which are 2 decades old, so say they're in the kind of era of 2004, I hope they don't hit the era of like 2007, 2008. I hope they can leapfrog to 2020, rather than go on this very painful journey. But yeah, I would assume you'd agree, like the expectations are definitely going to shift. I mean, new workforce, not just of doctors, but the nursing community, management, they're all a new generation of individuals that will have completely new expectations, and even the CIOs, the IT leaders, etc., in hospitals will have completely different expectations of what's acceptable in the workplace, and I hope we'll be able to do something about it. And that's not to say those who are working today are not trying their damnedest to solve for this, but as you get a swell of individuals who are really pushing, I think it's often when doors get opened.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think it's interesting when you consider things. I like that. I like that tension that happens with the sort of frustration of, hey, I'm doing this in every other part of my life. Why can't I do it here? That drives people to start little startups. Like, that drives people to build products. That drives people to lobby to make change. But there's also another thing that I think is interesting, is that if you look at sort of in hospital communication between staff, many things have come and gone. WhatsApp has come and stayed. People are using it. End of story. Yes, okay, it might not be compliant and all the rest of it, but then you look at it and go, well, actually, does policy change to fit around that? Because actually, that people have just circumnavigated the system to do their own thing, and they are actually doing it, and it's working, and it's fine. And yes, it has its problems and its issues and all the rest of it. But at the same time, there are these kind of movements of, well, I just have this technology everywhere else, so I am just going to use it. And then, interestingly, the policy and the regulators have to catch up with that. And I think that actually might start happening as well, because, you talk about PCs that bulky 5 to 7 minutes to load them up, and then a program you've got to load and type loads of nonsense in and blah blah blah. People are just going to start thinking like, hold on, I can just text the GP because I know him or I know her. Like, actually, I'm going to the pub later with her, so I'll just mention it when I'm there, and I'll just take a screenshot on my iPhone and then just ping it to her. She can upload that screenshot on her thing. We've just circumnavigated this whole thing. Like, this sort of stuff will start happening. And again, it forces it to go the other way. It's not forcing everyone to comply with the regulations that are actually there. It's actually then regulated. It's similar to what Babylon did to the whole space, right? Like, bulldoze through a load of stuff, and then regulators have to catch up behind. And again, similar to what happened in COVID, there's such an overwhelming motivation and desire and swell of need that, again, goes the other way. Actually, let's just let all this thing through temporarily and drop our requirements for and solve the problems at this end rather than getting it all done at this gate. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that can potentially happen. And I guess linked to that, but perhaps moving on slightly just before I let you go, is you've talked about optimism a lot. You are an optimist, and you work with so many technologies and you see so many things, and usability and design is clearly an area that you guys are leading the way on and very passionate about, and obviously that comes through in everything that you do. But my question is, like, on a personal level, what are you excited by at the moment? Is it a particular technology? Is it a particular project you're working on? Is it something that you've seen or heard, or like, I'm just interested, like, what is it that sort of, what are you feeling drawn to at the moment? What's exciting you?
So I think, you know, the fact that there is still such variation and opportunity to impact patient care is something that gets me out of bed in the morning. I think there are, I think it's something like 300 million surgeries done a year or something. It's a very big figure. Don't quote me on that. That even if you can move the needle very slightly, you will have a really big impact on individuals' lives. And so I think, you know, whatever I can do in my role and those I work with who can, you know, even have a slight impact on the care by introducing new technologies, I think, you know, as that compounds over the years, that's really exciting. From looking at other sectors, I think we are now part of a community that is going to drive transformation in healthcare through the application of various digital technologies. You know, and I think, you know, we've seen it happen within the car industry. You know, Elon Musk's, you know, his thesis boiled down was, I'm going to put a computer on wheels, right? That was the thesis, and that's what transpired. Other makes of cars are available, but that has overhauled, I think, some of the experience of drivers. I think, despite some wobbles, is driving up the safety. I think it's clearly, from an environmental perspective, really interesting in terms of that pursuit to electric. You know, as part of Medtronic, as part of the wider community of medtech companies, big and small, we are moving the sector in a direction of travel which I think is going to benefit the workforce and the patients in really quite profound ways. It's a long pursuit. When I you know, first joined large corporates, I was always amazed that, you know, short term was 2 or 3 years. And often in smaller companies, short term is 2 or 3 weeks.
Literally.
But that's critical because we've got companies now who are taking bets and long-term bets, making big investments, that there are still things we can improve. There are things we can release into medicine. They're going to drive improvements in health and patient care. And hey, what, you know, as a lad from London who dreamed of being a drummer. I think it's pretty neat where I've landed in terms of the work that I get to do, the people I get to work with, and the surgeons ultimately I get to serve. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah, lots to do. We won't give up. Along the way, there'll be bumps, but we're committed, and I think really exciting.
There's a book just here actually called The Infinite Game, Simon Sinek's book. So I don't know if you've read that, but it sounds like you'd enjoy it as a recommendation. Do you still find time to play drums? Actually,
I played drums at one of my friend's birthday parties.
Oh, amazing.
A radiologist in the NHS. We used to have a band many years ago, and we reformed for one night only.
Oh, glorious. I bet you enjoyed it.
It was actually it was pretty good. It's on video. Maybe I can give you a soundtrack. You can provide it as a soundtrack.
Perfect.
Podcast.
I'm due a change of my podcast music actually.
Well, you know where to come. I
do.
My fees are very reasonable from a composer.
Who knew? The Digital Technologies Business Unit at Medtronic, eh?
Hey, we're grafters.
George, listen, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate the insights. It's awesome to see and hear what you guys are doing. I think anything that companies like yours, big medical device, big pharma, like anything that you guys can do to sort of bolster the ecosystem, things like the study, things like the survey, and obviously all the subsequent stuff that goes along to actually converting that into actual change. I love it. I appreciate you, and thanks for coming on, man. If people want to learn more or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on X. I'd say LinkedIn probably your best chance of success. If anyone wants to drop me a message, by all means, I will commit to responding.
Thank you so much. We will, I'm sure, catch up soon.